Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Philip from Germany, and Anahit, and Jess, and Ashraful, if I mispronounced your name, I do apologize. Laura and Cindy and Adil and Wade and Jack and Sam. Great to see everyone here today. It's Friday. We've made it through the week. And if you are tuning in live on YouTube, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so you can chat along, ask questions, and have a good time. We've got Damaris from New York and Cornell. Fancy Friday indeed. And Andres and Juhi, great to see familiar faces, new faces. If you're new to this is one of our Adobe XD masterclasses. On Friday, we have a lot of different masterclasses. We have photography, Photoshop, video, a lot of good stuff. And after me, we have a fairly new masterclass with Kyle T. Webster, all about drawing and illustration. That's a fantastic class to go along with his more basic, fun classes that he does throughout the week. So Kyle is fantastic. Definitely stick around after my show as well. Steve from Utah, John from Netherlands, Henrik from Norway, Farron from Atlantic Canada, Bangladesh. This is great. Martin says, here for my weekly dose of boop. I love that. Timothy from Oakland, California. I hope you're well over there. I don't think the fires are... Actually, they're kind of close to there, aren't they? If anyone is in California and affected by the fires, I do wish you well. Be safe. If you have to evacuate. Don't mess around with these things. I do have, unfortunately, a few friends and coworkers who have had to evacuate already. Nothing you want to, mess around with. You and your family is important. Your house, while it's important, of course, you can always get a new one. File insurance claim, right? Your family comes first. All right, so Masterclass, here we go. Let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. And before we dive into things, Adobe Max is coming up very soon. It's in October. And I've been playing around with some of the new features that we're going to be releasing. Super exciting things. I've seen some exciting features from other products that are going to be announced at Adobe Max. But one of the biggest announcements that we've already made is that Adobe Max this year is going to be completely free and completely online. So head on over to max.adobe.com and register if you haven't yet. We have some fantastic speakers, of course. Our amazing CEO, Scott Belsky, is going to be there. Keanu Reeves is going to be there doing something. I don't know what anyone's going to be doing yet, but I do know I'm going to be hosting at least 2 sessions. So definitely register, sign up for my sessions. I'm going to be covering new features in Adobe XD. I have a beginner workflow. I have an advanced workflow. It's going to be a lot of fun. Annie Leibovitz. The speakers just go on and on and on. And I think there's also some speakers that we haven't announced yet. So stay tuned for that. So definitely go there. And Itis is saying, I can't wait to see Jason Levine at Max. Jason's always a fantastic time. Good friend of mine, coworker, part of the Evangelist team. And he's always a blast to see live on stage. And of course, this year, we're doing it all from home, basically. So I'm sure he's going to be putting on a fantastic show from the comfort of his own home. Yeah, Tyler, the creator as well. Keanu. And if you go to the speaker section, just because we have some time, there's just a ton of speakers from all different walks of life, covering all the different products that we offer. And I'm down here somewhere. It's all in alphabetical order by last name. And look, I'm like 3 or 4 away from Keanu Reeves. My good friend Jesus is right beside Keanu. So, we're basically best friends now, right? All right, so one more thing before we go on. I was going to show this on Dribbble, but Dribbble wasn't working. I've been experimenting a little bit with Adobe Dimension and trying to figure out how to, display the mock-ups that I create in Adobe XD of all these different product applications, things like that. So I put together this scene in Dimension, and I was wondering if you all would be interested in seeing something like this, either as a video or a live stream or whatever it might be. This was a lot of fun to create, and Dimension's surprisingly very powerful if you really get into things. So if you're interested in something like this, maybe I'll host a stream throughout the week. I don't know if I'll put it as a masterclass because it's mostly Dimension with a little bit of XD, but let me know in the chat. All right, so we are going to hop into Adobe XD. Boop, there we go. And today we're going to be building out a landing page. If you were with me during my daily challenges not too long ago, we built out this, finance, banking, cryptocurrency type of application. And I want to sort of build out another landing page that goes along with that. And I'm trying to mix things up. Last time I was working on a mobile application. This time is going to be more of a web landing page type of thing. And I'm thinking for a future masterclass, maybe next week, possibly, I want to leave it up to you. Usually I come to these masterclasses pretty prepared, but I'm thinking it could be fun just to dive into a masterclass, ask you to all pick an idea, pick a theme, maybe even pick some assets from Adobe stock, and then I'll just create something basically from scratch, almost like a freestyle. Could be fun, terrifying, but it could be fun. All right, so here we go. Yeah, Jason's mentioning Dansky. Dansky's been using Dimension a lot, and if you want to learn Dimension, I don't have any videos on it, but go to Dansky's YouTube channel. I don't remember the exact URL, but search Dansky on YouTube and you'll find it. He's got some great stuff, and he's been partnering with Adobe to bring more of that content. All right, so we're going to start with a simple web landing page, web artboard, just like that. Boop. And here we go, it's going to load, and we've got our landing page set up. Now, a lot of people ask me, I get this almost every single masterclass, I get it a lot in my daily challenges, I see it a lot on Discord, especially from beginner users, is when you're staring at an artboard like this blank artboard, and you have an idea, but you don't really know the direction you want to take it. How do you get inspiration to actually put something on this artboard? Because of course you can start blocking things out with rectangles and ellipses and basic text, Comic Sans of course, but where do you take it from there? How do you choose your colors and your assets and things like that? There are a few things I do. The first thing is I look for inspiration. Behance is a fantastic place to look for inspiration. Dribble's great as well, but if you're on Behance, you can just go ahead and search. And for this, it's more or less a banking application or a banking landing page. And you can narrow it down by creative fields, UI and UX, for example. And you'll get a ton of different landing pages and mobile applications that you can just browse through and get inspiration. Another area is stock images. So if you are on Adobe Stock or any of the other stock services, I do have a few that I've pulled from stock. And a lot of the times, just browsing some of these, and you can really kick off some of that, inspiration, right? So I just pulled a few of these. Some of them I'm not going to use today. This one, I'm thinking of what to do with it. It's kind of fun. I don't know why I grabbed it, but it's fun. But this one in particular, I thought was really nice. It's very clean. It's minimalistic for the most part. It's got some nice imagery. And I find that starting off with an image like this can really kickstart your project. So this is an Adobe Illustrator file, but thankfully Adobe XD accepts Illustrator. So I'm going to just drag it directly into Adobe XD, which is down on my other monitor in my dock, and it's going to load this Illustrator file. Basically, exactly like it was in Illustrator, right? And you can see, if I open up my layers, we've got our different folders, and inside of those folders, you basically have everything that came over from Illustrator, all the paths, all the groups, all that fun stuff, right? Which is fantastic. So I can just go ahead and grab this. I can also grab the background. Now, I will note that because this is completely path-driven, it's a pretty high depth, in-depth design. I can just zoom in forever. It's gonna be a little bit sluggish, naturally, but it handles it pretty well. That's not the one. Go over here and copy and paste. So I'm just pasting it directly into this Adobe XD file. I can make it nice and big if I want to, just so it fits nicely on my landing page, right? And there we go. So that looks pretty good. I do want to make tweaks to the actual size of this, so I'm just going to blow it up a lot. And there are a lot of elements on this particular design that I probably don't need, if I'm being honest, and a lot of them are kind of distracting. So because this is an Illustrator file with all the goodies in place, I can just double click and I can just start selecting the various, and I can see that in my layers panel as well. I can just select the various elements that I probably don't need, and just start deleting things. I can even move them around, so I can move this pen over here. Do I need this magnifying glass? Probably not. This plant is kind of fun. I can move this calculator inwards a little bit. Do I even need a calculator? I don't know, probably not. And there we go. I can also move these little guys. Just select all of them, move them in a bit, and there we go. We've got this fun looking illustration that we're gonna be able to use on our project. Perfect. Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger now that I have a few less elements. There we go. Yeah, Megan's saying, love the isometric look. I do too. I think this whole perspective thing is kind of working. It's looking pretty good. And if you notice, if you go to a lot of landing pages, you see a lot of this these days. So this is fun. All right, so we've got that looking pretty good. And maybe at the top, we might want some sort of a navigation bar. And I was thinking recently, maybe at some point, because navigation bars you pretty much see on everything we do, right? We see it on landing pages, we see it on mobile apps, at the top, at the bottom, we see hamburger menus. Maybe I'll build out a UI kit of some sort, filled with navigation bars, maybe one of these days. That could be fun. All right, so I've got a navigation bar going across the top, and I might want to give this background a little bit of color. We've got, let me actually hide this navigation bar just for a second. We've got this kind of curvy line right about here. It kind of blends into the background at some point. I might just want to grab this and just add a touch of a gradient to this. So right now it's just a solid white fill, as you can see in the properties inspector over to the right. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to change this from solid color to linear gradient. And maybe the top is going to be mostly white, but I'm going to add a touch of blue, just a little bit of blue in there. And then the bottom color is going to be more or less the same, but a little bit darker with a little bit extra blue in it. And I want to make sure just to do this, go side by side or diagonal like that. It looks pretty good. I'll just tweak the colors a little bit. When you're working with gradients, you want to be very careful. You want to be very subtle. Let me just go ahead and hide this for a second, right? The last thing you want to do is have a gradient that is way too harsh. So something like this, right? It looks okay, sort of, but it's still, the difference between the color at the top left and the color at the bottom right is just way too drastic, right? And you're gonna find when you do something like that, especially if you're gonna be adding content on top of it, things like images and text and buttons and lots of different things, you're gonna find a challenge, right? Because you're gonna have your text clashing with some of the colors. It's just gonna be a challenge. So go very subtle, and maybe for the one at the bottom, I'm just gonna pull in a little bit more blue just to kind of, grab inspiration from this particular image over here. And that's, again, one of the importances of using images in your projects and starting off with images is it could really kickstart and inspire the rest of your design. All right, so back over here, we're going to go ahead and unhide the navigation bar. And Lindsay says, you and Paul Tranny have very different philosophies about gradients. Hey, Kevin, welcome. I haven't seen what Paul's philosophy on gradients is. He probably likes bright, colorful, but his projects are very different, right? He focuses a lot on illustrations that may not necessarily have the tendency of clashing with other elements. When you're talking about user experience and user interfaces, you really want to make sure that accessibility is, hey, look, Jason is talking about accessibility. You want to make sure accessibility is at the forefront. And when you're working with very bright gradients and drastic gradients, you can fall into a weird hole of struggling with accessibility, which is why I'm keeping them fairly subtle. So we've got our navigation bar at the top. I'm going to go ahead and name this, and let's go ahead and name this illustration. Illustration. There we go. Spelling is hard. All right. Yeah, Lindsay says bright and contrasty. I love what Paul does. His illustrations are beyond fantastic, things I can never do. And for him, the bright and contrasty gradients absolutely work. But for UI and UX, you got to be careful. All right, so for this one, just to get a little bit fancy, because I love getting fancy, and it's Fancy Friday, right? I'm going to turn on a background blur. So right down here at the bottom, we can turn on background blur, boop. And this is another thing you want to be very careful. I'm kind of leaning on the edge today with gradients and background blurs. Eventually I'll get into shadows too. But you want to be very careful with your background blurs. You don't want something like this, right? I mean, you might, but for a navigation bar, it's going to be a little bit tricky. You want a very subtle background blur that really blurs out the elements behind it. And I'm going to go quite a bit lighter, somewhere right about here. Now, of course, once we start adding in these elements that we're going to pop on top, you know, our background blur may change a little bit to make sure that everything fits nicely. Cornell's asking, where did you get these beautiful illustrations? These were from Adobe stock. All right, so we've got that looking pretty good. Now on this navigation bar, we may want a few things. First thing, we need a logo, and we're going to keep things fairly simple. I'm going to open up my Nucleo icon manager. This is a third-party icon manager. Kevin's saying, was this graphic made in Dimension? As far as I know, it was not, but looking at it, it could have been, possibly, but probably not. It was probably, I mean, it is vector. Actually, I'm going to backtrack. It is vector, so it's probably done in Illustrator. All right, I'm going to just look up, let's say, money, for example. Just to keep things simple, we're going to grab a very simple icon, just bring it directly into XD, and position it somewhere about here. I'll make it a little bit larger. And this is kind of where we can start thinking about colors, right? We've got this icon at the top, and right now I think it's pure black. No, almost pure black. But it probably doesn't work for the navigation bar. So what we can do is we can start defining some of those colors. So for this one, I might actually want to grab my eyedropper, shortcut key I, and maybe just start by sampling one of these colors inside of this illustration. Because again, we're using this to inspire the rest of our design. So we've got that looking pretty good. And if I hop into my assets panel, I can press the plus button beside colors. Hey Adam, welcome, thanks for tuning in. And it's going to add that color directly into my assets panel. If you haven't used the assets panel yet, one of the great benefits of adding your colors and character styles and components, which we might get to a little bit later, is that if you have a lot of elements on your document with this color, you just have to change it once in your assets panel and it'll change everywhere, which is going to be fantastic. And I'll show you that soon. Now, to the right, we may want a very simple type, right? Text layer. So I'm going to press the T key on my keyboard and I'm just going to put name for now. I do want in the chat, I want you all to give me a name for this. It's mostly a banking application, like a new age banking application. So throw some suggestions in the chat. I will be taking a look, but for now I'm going to name it name, and I'll just name it actually banking for now. I pressed on the color just to apply it right there. Where are my glasses, dude? I don't know. They're around somewhere. I'm always losing my glasses. So we've got that over here to the left, where they got the icon to the left. I'm gonna put about 32 pixels from that icon. And for the typeface, I'm actually not gonna be using Poppins. I'm not gonna be using Babus. I'm not gonna be using Sophia today. Ooh, Banksy. Banksy is interesting. It's kind of like Pinsky, but it's also that artist. Okay, let's go with that. Lindsay, this is the first one, and I like it. Banksy. Just don't sue me, actual Banksy. I'm going to be using Josephine. I think it's Josephine, or is it Josephine? I don't know. I grabbed it from Adobe stock, and I thought it was a kind of a fun, it's a different typeface, right? It's got a little bit of a playfulness to it. It's a sans serif, but it's kind of fun, right? We've got Bank Boss, Cash Box, Gimme Money. That's a good one, Kevin. And I'll go for, let's say let's go for a bold, actually. There we go. That looks pretty good. All right, so we've got that let's bump it up to 32 and see what that looks like. That could work. It's nice and large. I think that will work. Very nice. And Libra by oh, Jason. Where should we post suggestions about future masterclasses? Laura's asking. Twitter, probably the best place. I'm on Twitter all day checking, catching up with news and things like that. Twitter.com/Pinsky. Tweet them at me. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, one of the future masterclasses, possibly next week, I'm going to leave it all up to you. I'm going to just come in here completely blank, and you're all going to tell me what to design. It's going to be a lot of fun. I don't know if it's going to be next week or the week after. All right, where's the real Howard? No Poppins, no Babus. Yeah, I know. No glasses. What's going on? All right, so we've got our logo looking pretty good. I'm going to make sure to group both of these elements. And then over to the right, I do want some links. So I'm going to copy that, paste it over here. Now the links typically should not be as large as the typeface for the actual logo. So I'm going to just bump it down. Let's try 24. And I probably also don't want the weight to be as strong. So maybe I'll bump it down to about, let's try regular. That looks okay. I think that could work. We want to avoid thin, definitely want to avoid thin. Light could possibly pass, but just to make sure that people can see it, I'm going to go for regular. I'm going to move this over to the side a little bit so it's not right on the particular logo. And this might be products. And over here, we might have overview and maybe pricing, right? So those are the three main links that we're going to run with. And I'm going to separate these a little bit. And what I can do is I can select all three of these links to make sure they're distributed evenly from each other. And Chetan is saying, how do you zoom out and in so quickly? I'm not sure if you're asking about this zoom. This is an accessibility feature on Mac OS. Or if you're asking about this, I am using a trackpad. I design mostly with trackpads. Some people don't understand how I do that, but I like it. I enjoy using my trackpad. So right up here at the top, I can press the distribute horizontally button, boop, and it's going to make sure that all three of those links are spaced evenly from each other. All right, so those are looking pretty good. Now, maybe over to the right here, we may want two elements. One, we might want a button to log in. And maybe if someone has not registered yet, possibly a button up here to actually get started. So for that, I'm going to grab the rectangle tool and draw out a simple button right at the top. It doesn't need to be too large. And what we can do is we can also play around with the corner radius. So I can pull in these handles on the very inside of the shape and just pull them in a little bit, maybe about 8 pixels, right? There's a lot of different ways we can do this. Let me go ahead and apply the color, just like that, boop, and turn off the border. Now we can use slightly rounded corners, just like this. We can use no rounded corners, or we can use completely rounded corners. I don't have a preference just yet, but because we're going to be using components when we do create this button, we can always change that later. We don't have to worry about manually updating every single one. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm also going to, where did my text layer go? I got to move it to the top. There we go. And this will just be get started. Now, of course, I can't see it. I also can't spell properly. There we go. Oh, I spelled it correctly. Okay. So we've got this on the inside. Now we want to make sure that the padding around this text layer is nice and even, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first just start by manually pulling it out, just like this. We've got about 12 pixels, 13. Let's make it, boop. You know what? Let's go 16. So I'm going to position this somewhere 16 there. And this is, let's see, what do we got? 13. So I'm holding down my command key and I'm using the right arrow key to enlarge the shape that I have selected by individual pixels. So did I not select it? 1, 2, 3. There we go. Perfect. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, since this is a call to action, we'll probably want to bump up the weight just a little bit, maybe semi-bold, possibly bold, maybe. Now you're noticing the background of that shape is not changing as I'm adjusting the weight. So here is a better way to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the text layer. I'm also going to select the actual shape. So I'm holding down Shift and selecting both of those layers. Michelle's saying, look at that Josephine Go. Yes, I love that typeface. I just got it today on Adobe Fonts, and it might be one of my new typefaces. It's fantastic. All right, so I have both those selected. And over to the right within my Properties Inspector, I'm going to press the plus button beside Component. I can also do that within my Assets panel, Command and Control K. A lot of different ways to do it. And when I do that, it's going to create a component with a default state, which I can name over here to the right. And then what I want to do is turn on padding down here within the Properties Inspector. And that's going to look at the relationship between the topmost layers and the background layer, which is the layer at the very back of the stack. And it's going to automatically set padding. right? Now, previously we manually made sure that the padding on the sides were 16 pixels. But now what I can do is if I select the text layer and I change, let's say, the weight, it's going to automatically resize the button to make sure that 16 pixels is there. If I want to just say sign up, for example, that background's going to automatically resize, which is fantastic. It's exactly what we want, right? All right, there we go. Now, since we are also working on a web-based project, ooh, Jason's saying hover, yeah. I was getting to that. Since we are working on a web-based project, hover does apply, right? So what we're able to do is on this particular component, we can go ahead and press the plus button over to the right beside the default state, and we can create a new state. We can also create a hover state. And this little lightning icon over to the right is going to let you know that it's going to be wired up by default. So you don't have to go into prototype mode. You don't have to wire it up. It's just done by default, which is fantastic. There we go. Hover state's a pretty good name. Martin is asking, is there a rule of thumb for ideal padding around text in a button? Example, font size in relation to padding. Yes and no. I don't, for the most part, unless your design system really outlines that, there's no hard rule across the board, right? However, the one thing you don't want to do is, let me go ahead and turn padding off just for, oh, this is a default state. Okay. Let me turn padding off for a second. The one thing you don't want to do is something like this. Just because visually it doesn't look very good. You just want to give a little bit of breathing room. On the flip side, you probably don't want to do this, because then you're taking up a lot of space. It just looks, especially if I preview this, it just looks a little bit out of place, unless that's the style you're going for. So typically, and if you're going with a, working on the 8 pixel grid, for example, 16 pixels, 24 pixels, 8 possibly, depending on the situation, depending on the device, of course it's gonna vary. But I found that, 16 or 24 pixels for this particular case looks okay. I would even, consider bumping this up just a little bit, honestly. So you can also bump up this, right? Possibly, right? There we go. All right. Cornell's asking, is there any way to change the default state? Not at the moment. I have spoken to the team about that. It's definitely on their radar, but they may not be able to get to it right away. They're working on some much bigger things for components and states and things like that. But I would like to see that one day. All right, so we've got our hover state now created and selected. And just to keep it very simple, I'm just going to dive in here and maybe just darken this just a touch, right? Very simple. So we've got our default state and our hover state. And now if we go ahead and press the play button at the top, we can just hover and we've got a fancy hover state, right? Jason's saying recommended for buttons. Button text is 16 pixels with up and down padding of 14 and 32 max for sides. Yeah, it's a pretty good base. And of course, depending on the device and your style, that could definitely change. But again, I would avoid too tight for the padding, because then it just looks a little bit strange. All right, so the navigation bar is looking pretty good. Now, one thing I'm noticing is that we've got our logo over here to the left, and it's about 90 pixels, 91 pixels-ish from the left-hand side, which, and if we're doing, let's say, an 8-pixel grid, that probably isn't accurate. I don't know what the actual size should be, but let's go for about 80, right? We want to make sure that on this side, it's about the same, right? So I'm going to just select this. I'm holding down Alt-Option. We have 64 right now, so I'm going to bump it up to 74 and just kind of bump it like that. And this one I'll do about 24 pixels possibly. Yeah, I think that could work. We can even bump it to maybe 32. That looks okay. I think that could work. All right, so we've got our navigation bar looking pretty good, but there may be a few more things that we may want within it. So I'm gonna start by making sure that everything is grouped together. And we're gonna get back to this navigation bar in a second. Someone's saying, you look tired. I think you're doing too much. I'm feeling pretty good, actually. I recently got over COVID. That was a lot of fun. I'm still dealing with a few lingering side effects here and there, but for the most part, I feel pretty good. Obviously, we have a lot going on, but I'm making sure to take breaks. I'm taking care of myself, drinking a lot of water. But I feel pretty good. Maybe it's just the lighting. Maybe it just adds some like bags under my eyes. I don't know. I feel good. All right. So before we get on, this plant is bothering me. I'm going to move it over here because we're probably going to need some extra room. Before we get back to the navigation bar, I may want some like header information and maybe a button over here to act as a call to action. So for that, I'm going to grab my text tool one more time. And let's go ahead and I'm just going to type this out just for a second, just so we can kind of get an understanding of how things are going to look. Just like that. All right, and maybe for this one, because it's a larger text, larger font, we might be able to get away with a thinner font, right? Thinner weight. That could work. We don't want to go with the actual thin, right? Probably don't want to do that. But maybe light could work, regular possibly. But let's try light and see how that looks. I'm going to bump this up a little bit more. And let's go ahead and fill in this actual copy. So this could be banking reimagined, for example, right? Keep it very simple. Again, this is a very new age, minimalistic banking service of some sort. And we're going to stick with the Josephine, I don't know how to pronounce it, typeface. We're going to stick with that. And maybe I'll just tweak the line height just a little bit. That looks pretty good. There we go. And below, we may want to pull in another button. Now, we already have one saved in our assets panel, right? So I can just drag one out here and pop this into place. Now, this one in particular is a little bit smaller. So you have to ask yourself, do you think that do you want a separation between your smaller buttons and your larger buttons? Will you be making a lot of structural overrides to the smaller buttons versus the larger buttons? And in some cases, the answer will be absolutely yes, right? So in that case, I'm actually going to, what I could actually do is just ungroup this component and just make it a little bit larger. And maybe for this one, we can also just round out the corners completely. And we can make this text a little bit larger as well, maybe 32 pixels. And then just like we did earlier, we want to make sure to either group these or put them into a component. So this could be a larger button, for example, and make sure padding is set. And on the sides, right now we have 26 pixels on the right, which looks okay. Let's try 32, and then 32 on this side as well. Right? And just tweak this just a little bit. There we go. Now, thinking about the user experience, it probably doesn't make too much sense to have a get started button here and a get started button here, right? Both are above the fold, so you probably don't want that. So this one will probably say something different. This might say explore features, for example, right? Something like, features. Hopefully you have more than one feature. All right. Kevin says, love this approach on developing a style guide. Asking questions will need a large button for future pages. Yeah, it depends on your style guide, depends on your design system, depends on a lot of things. Whether you go with a single button, like a large button, and then just change the size. You know, it's going to vary. This could be a large button, for example. There we go. Philip says, don't know why, but I'm not a fan of completely rounded corners. Yeah, it really depends. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. For this one, we can probably just bump it back to about, let's say 16. Come on, there we go. That looks okay. Or we can even go completely like this. No, I don't know. I don't have a opinion either way. Damaris is saying, I'm not able to change the fill for the hover state of the component without changing the text within it as well. Without changing. So if you're okay, I think I know what you're talking about. So if you are asking, like if you have an instance, for example, I think this might be what you're talking about. If you have this over here, right? Let me put it over here. If you've got your default state and your hover state, if you were to change this text, hello, that's terrible spelling. But over here in the hover state, you'd have to also change the text layer. That's a limitation right now. The team is working on it. Hopefully they'll be able to work on that at some point, but it's called horizontal syncing behind the scenes. But yeah, you'll have to change it both. Hopefully that's what you're talking about. If not, definitely clarify and I'll take another look. All right, so we've got this looking pretty good, right? And that looks fancy. So we've got our illustration over here. This plant is kind of throwing me off. Maybe it's the color, this white color here. I don't know what it is, but it's throwing me off. Maybe I'll position it right about here. All right. Philip says, like the slightly rounded corners more because it's more the style of the laptop. Ooh, that's a good point. That is a good point. So what I can do is just, whoop. Let's try 8. 8 might be too little. Let's go for 16. And 16. There we go. That could work. And maybe for this one, we might just want to bump up the padding on the sides a little bit. Possibly, maybe. Let me just tweak that just a touch more. There we go. All right. Perfect. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Very clean, very minimalistic, but I do want to add a few more things to the navigation bar, right? Maybe when someone either hovers or clicks on the products section, we might want a pop-up to appear with some information about these products, right? Just to give them a very quick overview of what they might be getting into. Michelle says, put the plant in the foreground on the right. Put the plant in the foreground. The foreground. On this side? Oh, maybe. Is that what you're talking about? Oh, that's interesting. Interesting. That could work. Right beside that little pen down there. Interesting. Okay. So, I do want more information to be displayed under products. So to let users know that there is something there, what we might need to do is, have some sort of an arrow. Of course, you can do underline as well, but I think an arrow will kind of get the idea across that if they click on that, something will expand. So what I'm going to do is I have the products, I'm going to hop into my layers panel. I've got the products text layer selected. I'm going to turn on my grid or my guides, like whatever you want to call this, right? And I'm doing that Command and Control and then the apostrophe key. And if you don't know where that is, or if it doesn't work for whatever reason, if you select your artboard, right over here to the right, you can turn on your grid and in the Properties Inspector. All right. So with that done, I can just grab my pen tool and just boop, boop, and boop. That's it. Very simple. And I can apply this as a border. Perfect. Might increase the size a little bit. Maybe I'm going to round out the caps down here over to the right. And this looks a little bit too, looks a little bit too large. So I'm going to just shrink it down just a little bit. That's looking a little bit better. Let's position it. Make sure it's inside of the navigation. Let's do about 16 pixels from the left. So Damaris is saying, what happens is the text disappears. I only want to change the color of the button for the hover state. Oh, so make sure that when you are editing things like components, make sure you don't have, see in the layers panel here, you have, I have the entire component selected, which is highlighted in blue. Make sure you're selecting the individual layers. So you can either click on them inside of your layers panel, just like this. So I just have the button, the container selected, right? Or if you're doing it on canvas, if you have the entire component selected, you can double click to go inside of the component, or you can hold down your Command or Control key and just click once, and you'll be able to select the individual layers. So if I click on the background layer and I change the color, the text layer will remain untouched, right? So make sure you have just the individual layers selected. Kevin is saying, question, let's say you have a small button with rounded corners. What if I want to create a bigger button with rounded corners similar to the smaller button? Would it automatically do that when resizing? Would it automatically do that when, I'm not sure what do that means. Clarify, Kevin, and I'll get back to that. All right, so we've got this little down arrow, and hopefully it will let users know that something is under there. And now we need to design that something. So for this, I'm still in the navigation. I'm going to just name this arrow. I'm going to grab my rectangle, and I'm simply going to just draw one out. I'm going to make it nice and large. And it's okay if I have a little bit of overlapping with this area here. And I want to make sure to round out the corners a little bit. Let's go for 16 pixels. And I'm going to make sure that navigation is above all of this fun stuff. All right. So you have to make another decision, right? You have this white box on a fairly light background. There's this light blue over here. You have this illustration with a lot of light colors. Of course, you have a blue, which is nice, but you also have light colors here. So you have to make a decision how you're going to separate this white box that you created with the background, right? Of course, you can change the color. You can change the color to a blue, for example. That's interesting, but now it clashes with this. So there's a few things we can do. One, we can turn on background blur. That kind of helps. But, honestly, I think for this, we can keep it very simple and we can just use a shadow. Now, I talk about shadows a lot, and some of you might be sick of hearing me talk about shadows. But one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to do this. Even though the purpose of this shadow is to separate this box from the light background, this just looks like a GeoCities website from 1995. Y'all remember GeoCities? Some of you may not even been born when GeoCities was around, but it's just not. Just don't do this, right? So in this case, you want to keep it very subtle because I think it'll still work. So I'm going to separate it from the background quite a bit. So I'm bumping up that Y value. I'm also going to blur it quite a bit as well. So I'm holding down Shift and using my arrow keys to go up by 10 pixels. And it's going to bump that up quite a bit as well. And there's really no right value for these shadow values. It depends on the size of the object, depends on the device, depends on a lot of different things, right? So I've bumped that up a little bit and it's starting to look pretty good. It's very subtle and it definitely, Martin says, I remember Angel Fire. Yeah, Angel Fire. Yes, I do too. I'm getting old. So it definitely separates it from the background, right? And I might, just to get a little bit fancy and to pull in some of that color, just add a little bit of that blue, right? Now, I'm going to add a little bit of a darker blue and play around with the opacity a little bit, just until I get it looking pretty good. Whoops, you don't want to do that, right? Let's see what that looks like. Okay, I think that could work. So all of a sudden, if you take a look at the before, right? There's the before. It's definitely clashing with that background. And then the after with the shadow, very subtle, but it definitely does create that separation between the background, right? All right, I might want to actually just bump this up, the rounded corners just a little bit. Okay, so we've got that done. And if you really want to, you can add a little bit of background blur. Now the default background blur will knock out your shadows. So you want to make sure to increase the effect opacity. So now you have a little, look at that. Look at how subtle that is, right? Especially in this area here. You just have a little bit of that blue seeping through before and after, but it still gives you that nice light box and your shadow still comes through, right? So it just helps create that nice, not necessarily neumorphism feel, but it just creates that nice feeling, right? Okay, so now inside of here, we may want to display what the products will actually look like. So I'm gonna grab a rectangle. And Kevin, I do see that you are clarifying. I will try to look at that after. I just want to make sure I get through definitely this particular part. I'm going to go ahead and create this rectangle, and this is going to be a placeholder for the actual products. Now, here's something to keep in mind, right? Yeah, it's almost like a glassy look. So this outer container that we just styled, right, this one here, we have the rounded corner set to 24 pixels. Now you might be thinking, especially if you're just getting into design, that you should also create 24 pixels for the shape on the inside, right? No, don't want to do that, right? Because visually, even though if you put this to the edge, it matches. But if you inset this a little bit, visually, it doesn't work, right? Because it's kind of, it's inset a little bit. It's a little bit, I don't know how to explain it, but visually it just looks a little bit off. So you'll just want to take this and just pull this back a little bit, right? Just like that. This is about 16 pixels. And all of a sudden you have a much nicer visual corner. So you have this 24 pixels up here and then 16 pixels here, right? There we go. All right. Now I'll position this, let's say 24 pixels and 24 pixels. Beautiful. Okay, so we have a little bit of a container that we're going to use for maybe an image for this particular product. And then down here, we may want the name of the product and then maybe a little bit of description. Now, to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to actually just grab this typeface over here, this text layer, and just pop it over here. I might want to make this a little bit smaller. 24 pixels looks pretty good, and this will be product name. Wow, I can't spell. And then below, we can copy this and we can change this. Let's bump it down just a little bit. 16 might be too small because we're also going to bump the weight down to maybe regular, for example. And we want to change this to area text because we want to make sure that anything we type is confined inside of this area. I'm going to pull this down a little bit as well. Right? And just to speed things up a little bit, I'm going to hop into my plugins and I'm going to use the Lorem Ipsum plugin just to fill this in with something, right? And there we go. Okay, that could work. I can also toy around with the actual size. Okay, that works. I think we're going to run with that. And we've got, make sure this is 24 pixels as well. Perfect. Okay, so we have one of our products set up, and now maybe we want 3 more, at least 2 more, right? So to make our life a little bit easier, I'm going to select this one, hold down my Shift key, and select all the other layers that are part of this. And I'm going to Command and Control R to turn into a repeat grid. You can also press the repeat grid button right here at the top, and boop, and boop. Haha. Cornell is saying, is there a reason why you're not making the background blur darker? Not a particular reason. I can definitely tweak that if I like. So this one here, I'm assuming you're talking about. So I can definitely tweak it a little bit, maybe pull this in a little touch as well, right? I just want to make sure that anything I'm adding on top of that container doesn't have too much clashing going on with the background. I want to make sure that everything is nice and visible. So I'm keeping this fairly solid, and then the elements above it, we're going to do this nice blue that we've been using. I think I saw another question. Bum, 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 bum. Possibly not. Okay. So there we go. And because this is now a repeat grid, if I needed to, I can hop over to Finder. I've got some images here. I can just grab, let's say 1, 2, and 3, and just drag them directly into the grid. There we go. Just like that. And now we have some products. So we have this area looking pretty good, right? But of course we don't want this to be displayed this entire time. So what we can do is, let me go ahead and make sure to select both of these elements. I'm going to group these. I'm going to call this products. And we want to use this inside of a component. Now, you can either use this inside of a large component, like the entire navigation bar, you can do that, or just with the products label. It's completely up to you. Also depends on who you're working with, your developers and that sort of thing. But I'm gonna go ahead and just do with products. So I'm gonna select the products group that we just created. I'm also gonna select the text layer and the down arrow. There we go. And I'm going to turn all 3 of these into a component. So Command and Control K, and you're going to notice that is inside of my components section. Now, again, by default, you don't necessarily want this to be displayed. So with this component selected, I'm going to just dive in here, and I'm going to just turn off this group. I'm just going to hide it, just like that. So this is going to be our default state for this particular link, right? Now what we can do is we can press the plus button, and now you need to decide, do you want this to be a hover state or a clickable state, right? I think hover state could work because this is a web landing page, right? Of course, if you want to create a new state, you can go into prototype mode and wire it up just like that. But I'm going to go ahead and create a hover state. And for this, all I have to do is turn that on, turn the group on that I previously hid. And maybe I can also grab this arrow and just flip it upside down. Just like that. Just so you're telling users that you can also click on it. Of course, this is a hover state, but it'll also collapse, right? All right. Martin's saying, I think the contrast between product name and text needs work. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of this needs work. But with the limited time that I have, I just want to make sure I get through a lot of the concepts that we're working on, and then definitely tweak later on and use plugins like Stark to check for accessibility and things like that. All right, so we've got our 2 states. We have our default state and our hover state. And now all I have to do is press the plus button or the play button at the top. We of course have our button over here that we created. And now, woo, look at that. Woo, woo, right? Woo. Now, if we want to get a little bit more fancy, because we are using auto animate to animate the actual hover effect, right? We can go into our default state, into the products, let me show this for a second, into repeat grid. We can collapse these and move them off to the side a touch. You're probably thinking, what the heck are you doing, right? I'm gonna make sure to hide this one more time. Whoops, not the whole thing, just this one. Now, if I go to my hover state, you probably want to do this beforehand, right? Of course. I'm gonna make sure to move this back into place. So this was 24, and I'm gonna enlarge this. There we go, just like that, and pop this into place right there. So now, if I go ahead and play this one more time, we just have this fun, it's probably completely unnecessary, right? But you can do that. Fun things you can do just by designing. I don't like it completely, if I'm being honest, so I'm gonna actually undo this. Undo. There we go. That looks a little bit better. Very clean, right? All right, let's see. Are there any upcoming discounts on Adobe Creative Cloud? That I have no idea. That's way over my head. Not a clue. Wish I knew, but not sure. If you're a student, you get discounts, which is great. If I can animate this UI, is it make a plus for the client? Is it good? If I can animate this UI, is it make it a plus for the client? I'm not sure what that means, but one thing you can do is if you go to share mode, you can actually share this directly with your client. They can interact with it online, and the entire thing is clickable, hoverable, all those fun things. So you can definitely do that. Let's see. Got a question. Can we make an item scroll up from anywhere from the screen and stop fixed at the header space? So if I'm understanding correctly, probably not yet. I think you're asking for scroll trigger. So you can scroll to different areas on your page, but you can't have items react as you scroll. That's something the team is definitely thinking about and exploring, but we don't have that just yet. All right. So this is looking pretty good. We've definitely made some progress. The one thing I do want to bring in is during my daily challenges, I did create some mobile applications. I may also want to show off that there is a mobile aspect to this particular service. So I'm actually going to just go over to this document, grab the design that I worked on and just paste it over here, right? And I want to make sure to just expand this landing page a little bit. Whoops, select the artboard and just expand downwards. Just like that. Did I move this over? I think I did. There we go. So I've got this design that we worked on during the challenges. Now, when we did work on it, we used this really nice purple color. And this could completely ruin everything that we've worked on, right? So what I want to be able to do is I want to just change this purple. And this goes back to why assets and colors and character styles are so important. What I can do is I can go into my assets panel. I can select this purple color, just add it right here. And now if I right click on it, press edit, I can use this eyedropper and just sample this color. And it's going to change every instance of that purple. Now this one in particular was a little bit of a different purple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use that blue and just change it just a little bit. There we go. Perfect. That's looking a little bit better, right? All right. Marcin is asking how big a team is working on the new features in Adobe XD. It's pretty big. I don't know exactly how many, but there's several hundred, if not more, people working on there's like different squads. Some are working on prototyping features. Some are working on components. Some are working on co-editing. There's a lot of different squads working on a lot of different features. Some you're going to be seeing in Adobe Max. Some might take a little bit longer. Some features take months, if not years, to create. And we want to make sure to get them right, which is why we don't really tease features until they're ready. So I don't want to talk about the features that are coming out of Adobe Max just yet, just in case maybe it doesn't feel right and we have to pull it last minute, which happens. It does happen. All right, any other questions? Let me just see. If I missed any, definitely throw them in the chat or tweet them at me and I will do my best to answer. All right, so we've got this looking pretty good. And because I did drag the artboard down, it did add this handle over here to the left, and that's your viewport height. And that basically sets your scrolling, your viewport, right? So if I press the play button, we've got our landing page at the top. And then if I scroll, I can just scroll down and see everything else. Ellie is saying, I have a non-relative question. How do I save a prototype as a high-quality GIF animation to share on Behance? So what I would suggest, if you are, if you do want to share high-quality things on Behance, is play the prototype. If you're on the Mac, definitely hit the record button at the top right. It'll start recording everything that you're going to be doing. Interact with your prototype as you typically would. Press it again or press escape. It's going to save it as a video file on your computer. I believe you can upload MP4s on Behance, but you can also use an application like GIF Brewery to convert that into a GIF, right? Now, of course, whenever you convert something into a GIF, it's not going to be as high quality as the video, but it might help a little bit. But I believe you can upload videos on Behance. You can also embed videos. You can also embed entire prototypes from share mode, but I'll get to that probably next week. All right. So that is about going to do it. We did accomplish quite a bit today, but not as much. I did have a little bit more that I did want to accomplish, but a big thank you to everyone who has tuned in today. Stick around. Kyle T. Webster's Masterclass coming up in a few minutes. If I did miss your question or you have additional questions later on, tweet them at me, twitter.com/Pinsky. And I think if I go ahead and play this, yeah, it's right down there. Pinsky. Also my Dribble account. So follow me in all the places. I'm going to be back next week, same time, same place. And have a great week, everyone. Okay, have a great weekend. And I'll see you all next time.